I should have known better when the job posting had more blank spaces than actual information. But when you're down to your last $112 and sleeping on your brother's couch, well, you don't ask too many questions about overnight security work that pays $15 an hour. The carpentry business had gone under in March. 3 months of watching everything I'd built over 8 years crumble like wet drywall. Russell had been my partner, my friend, I thought. But when the contracts started drying up and the bills kept coming, he found himself a better opportunity. With my wife. Catherine packed her bags on a Tuesday morning while I was out chasing down a client who owed us $4,000. Came home to empty dresser drawers and a note on the kitchen counter. Real professional. Like she was terminating a business contract. I can't do this anymore, Sammy. Russell and I are starting fresh in Jackson. Don't try to contact me. Don't try to contact me. Like I was some stranger she'd met at a gas station. The divorce papers came 2 weeks later, delivered by a guy who looked embarrassed to be handing them over. I signed everything without reading it. What was the point? She'd already taken what mattered. So when I saw the posting for night security at Riverside Mall, hell, it looked like salvation. Simple patrol duties, it said. Monitor property, report incidents, benefits after 90 days. The kind of straightforward work where you show up, walk around, and collect a paycheck. I'd driven past Riverside plenty of times over the years, watching it die slow. Used to take Catherine there when we were dating, back when it still had stores open and people actually shopped there. We'd walk around holding hands, maybe catch a movie at the theater on the upper level. She always wanted to throw coins in the fountain and make wishes. Funny how things turn out. The place had been closed since 2019, according to the paperwork I filled out. Corporate downsizing, they called it. Online shopping killed another mall. Nothing unusual about that. Half the shopping centers in Mississippi were either dead or dying. My first shift started at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. I showed up 20 minutes early because that's what you do when you need a job. The parking lot stretched out like a black ocean under the streetlights. Cracked asphalt with weeds pushing through, empty except for my truck and a white sedan parked near the main entrance. Levi Kelly met me at the side door. Day supervisor, he'd told me over the phone. 40-something guy with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of serious expression that made you straighten your shoulders without thinking about it. His uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut paper, every button aligned, every crease perfect. Made me glad I'd ironed mine twice. Mr. Brewer. He shook my hand with calloused fingers, working man's hands despite the clean uniform. Right on time. That's good. The door opened into a service corridor that smelled like industrial cleaner and something else. Something stale. Old air that had been circulating through empty spaces too long. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that harsh white glow that makes everyone look sick. Basic patrol route is straightforward, Levi said as we walked. His keys jingled against his belt, more keys than seemed necessary for a dead mall. Upper and lower levels, main corridors, check the anchor stores. Security office's central location, good sight lines to most of the common areas. We passed maintenance rooms, storage closets, doors marked with codes I didn't recognize. The hallway felt longer than it should have, like we were walking into the belly of something huge and hollow. Now, he stopped walking and turned to face me. Before we go any further, there's something you need to understand about this position. He pulled a manila folder from under his arm. The kind of folder you'd find in any office, except this one looked like it had been handled by a lot of different people. Edges worn soft, corners bent, small tears in the manila that had been reinforced with tape. Previous guards developed some protocols, he said, opening the folder, based on their experiences here. Inside were 6 sheets of paper, each one typed on what looked like an old manual typewriter. The kind where the letters hit unevenly and left little impressions in the paper. Someone had numbered them 1 through 6 in careful handwriting. These aren't official company policies, Levi continued. His voice had dropped to something quieter, more careful. But I strongly advise you to follow them exactly. I took the folder and read the first rule. Do not use the main entrance after 11 p.m. Use the side service door at all times during night shifts. Why not the main entrance? Levi glanced down the hallway, then back at me. The previous guard, Charles Haynes. He tried using the main entrance one night around midnight. Security cameras caught him standing there for 3 hours, just standing outside the glass doors. Wouldn't respond to radio calls. When the day shift found him the next morning, he was... Levi paused, choosing his words. He requested immediate transfer to day security at a different location. Rule 2. Do not investigate sounds from the upper-level food court between midnight and 4 a.m. Log any disturbances but maintain distance. Sounds? Chairs scraping, conversations, sometimes music from the old arcade. Levi's glasses reflected the fluorescent lights, hiding his eyes. The power's been shut off to that section for 2 years. I read Rule 3. Never enter stores where security gates are still down. If gates lower on their own during patrol, report location and avoid area until next shift. Rule 4 made my stomach tighten. Do not respond to voices calling from inside closed shops, especially if they use your name. How would they know my name? They always know. Levi took off his glasses and cleaned them with a small cloth from his pocket. Charles said they sounded like people he recognized, old friends, family members. Rule 5. If the central fountain begins operating on its own, do not approach. Maintain visual contact and radio immediately. The last rule was the longest. If shoppers in 1990s clothing appear in the storefronts, do not acknowledge them. Do not make eye contact. Continue patrol route normally. If they follow you, proceed immediately to security office and remain there until they disperse. I looked up at Levi. This is a joke, right? His expression didn't change. Riverside Mall closed in 2019 after 43 years of operation. Declining foot traffic, store closures, the usual story. But something about this place. He gestured around us. People keep coming back, not breaking in, exactly. They just appear. What kind of people? The kind that shouldn't be here. Levi put his glasses back on. The mall died slowly, Mr. Brewer. Lost stores one by one, lost customers year by year. But the dying, it wasn't clean, wasn't final. Some things don't want to let go. The fluorescent light above us flickered, casting moving shadows down the corridor. In that brief moment of unstable light, I could have sworn I heard something from deeper in the building. Footsteps, maybe, or voices. Follow the rules, Levi said quietly. All 6 of them. The guards who didn't. He left the sentence hanging in the stale air between us. I folded the papers back into the manila folder, my hands steadier than I felt inside. $15 an hour suddenly seemed like either too much money or not nearly enough. But Catherine was gone. Russell had my business, and my brother's couch was getting less comfortable every night. What exactly had I gotten myself into? Levi's voice dropped lower when he started talking about Charles Haynes. That's when I knew this wasn't just some cautionary tale he told all the new guys to keep them on their toes. Charles was a good guard, he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with that careful precision he seemed to bring to everything. Followed protocol to the letter for his first 2 months. Never missed a check-in, never skipped a section of his route. The fluorescent light above us kept flickering, made Levi's face look older in the unsteady glow, carved deeper lines around his eyes. I could smell that industrial cleaner again, mixed with something else. Something stale and forgotten that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. What happened to him? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. Levi pulled out a small notebook from his shirt pocket, flipped through a few pages. His fingers were steady, but I noticed he kept the notebook angled so I couldn't see what was written there. Rule 3, he said. Never enter stores with security gates down. Charles broke that one. The way he said it, like he was reading from an incident report. Clinical, professional, but underneath that I heard something else. Guilt, maybe, or fear. There's a Radio Shack on the lower level, Levi continued. Been sealed up since the mall closed. Gate's been down for 5 years, never moves. Charles was doing his midnight rounds when he heard something from inside. I shifted my weight, felt the new utility belt dig into my hip. What kind of something? His father's voice. The words hung in the air between us. I waited for him to explain, to add some detail that would make it sound less impossible. He didn't. Charles's father died when he was 12, Levi said. Heart attack. Charles found him in their garage, slumped over a workbench. That was 30 years ago. My mouth went dry. And he heard his father calling for help. Same voice he remembered from childhood, asking Charles to come inside and help him fix something. Said it sounded just like the old days, when his dad would call him out to the garage to hold a flashlight or hand him tools. I thought about my own father then. Dead 6 years now. If I heard his voice calling to me, Christ, what would I do? Levi must have seen something in my expression because he nodded slowly. That's what got Charles. The security cameras caught everything. Showed him standing outside that Radio Shack gate for almost 20 minutes just listening. You could see him talking back, having a whole conversation with someone who wasn't there. But he went in. Eventually, Levi closed the notebook, slipped it back into his pocket. Cameras show him using his master key on the gate mechanism. Took him 3 tries to get it open. His hands were shaking pretty bad by then. Soon as that gate rolled up, he disappeared inside. Camera angle can't see into the store itself. The corridor felt colder suddenly. I pulled my jacket tighter, tried to focus on Levi's words instead of the way shadows seemed to move at the edge of my vision. How long was he in there? 4 hours. 4 hours. I tried to imagine it, and standing in an empty store for 4 hours, talking to someone who wasn't there. The thought made my skin crawl. Police found him when I called it in, Levi said. I'd been trying to raise him on the radio since 2 a.m. No response. When they went in, Charles was sitting on the floor behind the old counter, staring at the empty shelves. Completely calm. Kept telling the officers he was helping customers, taking inventory, making sales. But there was nobody there. Store's been gutted for 5 years. Nothing on the shelves, no merchandise, no cash register, just empty display cases and bare walls. But Charles, he kept apologizing to the officers for keeping them waiting, said he'd be with them as soon as he finished with the customer he was helping. Levi paused, rubbed his forehead like he was trying to erase the memory. Took 3 officers to get him to leave. He kept insisting he couldn't abandon his customers, that his father had taught him better than that. They finally had to carry him out. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What happened after? Charles quit the next morning. Wouldn't talk about what he experienced in there. Wouldn't explain what he'd seen or heard. Packed up his apartment that same week and moved to Oregon. His sister lives there. Far as I know, he's never spoken about that night to anyone. The fluorescent light gave another flicker, casting the corridor in brief darkness. When it steadied, Levi was watching me carefully. That's when I started taking the rules seriously, he said. Before Charles, I figured they were just stories, old wives' tales that guards passed down to spook each other. But seeing those security tapes, he shook his head. There's something in this place that doesn't want to let go. Something that knows exactly how to get inside your head. I thought about Catherine then. About Russell. About all the voices from my past that I'd love to hear again, even for just a few minutes. All the conversations I'd replay if I got the chance. The apologies I'd want to make. The explanations I'd want to hear. That's when it really hit me. The weight of what I'd gotten myself into. This wasn't going to be some easy overnight security job where I could catch up on sleep and collect a paycheck. This place, whatever was wrong with Riverside Mall, it was real. Real enough to drive a good guard to break protocol, real enough to make him disappear into an empty store for 4 hours, real enough to send him running to another state. The empty corridor around us suddenly felt different, more threatening. Like those shadows I'd been trying to ignore were actually watching me, measuring me, figuring out which buttons to push. Every doorway looked darker. Every corner seemed to hide something I couldn't quite see. I realized my hands were shaking slightly, forced them to be still. The rules weren't suggestions. They weren't guidelines or recommendations. They were survival instructions, written by people who'd learned the hard way what happened when you didn't follow them. And I needed to take them seriously if I wanted to avoid ending up like Charles Haynes. By my second week, I'd started thinking maybe I had this job figured out. Maybe the rules were just precautions. Old stories that got blown out of proportion over the years. You know how these things go. One guard hears a noise, tells another guard it was footsteps, and by the time it reaches the third guy, it's a whole damn ghost story. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. It was 1:17 in the morning when the fountain started up. I was doing my rounds, checking the anchor stores like Levi taught me, when I heard it. Not the usual building sounds, the settling concrete, the HVAC systems cycling on and off, the occasional creak from the skylights. This was different. Water moving. A lot of it. The central fountain hadn't run in. Hell, probably since before the mall closed. I'd walked past it maybe 30 times already. This big circular thing in the main concourse with fake marble edges and a bunch of decorative metal pieces that looked like they were supposed to shoot water up in patterns, covered in dust and dead leaves that had blown in through the loading docks. Definitely not hooked up to anything. But there it was, running. I stood there for a minute, maybe 2, just listening to the sound of water hitting water, rhythmic, almost musical. The kind of sound that should have been peaceful, but somehow wasn't. Not here, not at 1:17 in the morning in a dead mall. My first thought was plumbing. Had to be. Some kind of backup system kicking in, maybe a pressure valve releasing somewhere. Made sense. Old buildings did weird things sometimes, especially when the heating and cooling systems were still running, but everything else was shut down. I walked over to check it out. The water was crystal clear. Clean as anything you'd see in a working fountain. No rust, no mineral buildup, no algae or mold or any of the nastiness you'd expect from pipes that hadn't been used in 5 years. Just clean water shooting up in perfect arcs, catching the security lighting and throwing little rainbows around the concourse. That's when I noticed the patterns. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks. The way the jets were pulsing, some going high while others stayed low, creating these shapes in the air that lasted for maybe 3 seconds before the water fell and the pattern changed. Random, you know? Like watching clouds. Except it wasn't random. I watched for maybe 10 minutes, standing there like an idiot with my flashlight in one hand and my radio in the other, and the patterns, they were deliberate, precise. The water would shoot up in specific sequences, hold for exactly the right amount of time, then shift to something new. Letters. The fountain was spelling out letters. M-A-R-I-A first, then R-O-B-E-R-T, then J-O-S-H-U-A. Names, one after another, each one spelled out in water jets that had no business knowing how to spell anything. I should have walked away right then. Rule 6 was pretty clear about ignoring things that shouldn't be happening. But I couldn't move. Couldn't stop watching those names appear and disappear in the air above the fountain. Because I recognized some of them. Maria Santos. Worked at the Spencers for 15 years before the mall closed. Had a heart attack in the parking lot during the Everything Must Go sale in 2019. I remembered reading about it in the local paper. Robert Chen. Owned the jewelry repair kiosk near Sears. Stroke. maybe 6 months after they shut the place down. Lost his business, couldn't make rent on his apartment. Stress got to him. Joshua. I couldn't place Joshua at first, but then I remembered. Kid who worked at GameStop, overdosed about a year after everything closed. Couldn't find another job, couldn't handle the depression. 19 years old. People who died. That's what the fountain was spelling out. Names of people who died after the mall closed. People who lost their livelihoods when this place went under. My hands started shaking. Not from cold. The building stayed pretty warm even at night. From something else entirely. That's when I heard the sounds from the food court. I should have ignored them. Should have turned around right then and walked back to the security office and pretended none of this was happening. But the sounds, they were so normal, so familiar. The kind of sounds I'd heard 1,000 times growing up, hanging out at the mall with friends on weekends. Conversations, laughter, the beep of cash registers, the hiss of fryers, the clink of ice machines, all coming from the upper level where the food court used to be. I looked up toward the escalators, the ones that had been shut off for 5 years, and I could see light bleeding down from up there. Warm, yellow light. Like the food court was open for business. Don't investigate sounds from the upper-level food court between midnight and 4 a.m. That was Rule 2, clear as day. Levi had been specific about it, and Charles Haynes' story was still fresh in my mind, but I climbed those stairs anyway. The escalators were still dead, so I had to walk up the metal steps. Each footstep echoed in the empty concourse below, mixing with the sound of the fountain and the growing noise from above. As I got closer to the upper level, the sounds got clearer, more detailed. "Can I get a Big Mac meal with a Coke? That'll be $7.49. Will you be eating here today? Make sure those fries are fresh." Voices. Real voices having real conversations, except there was nobody up there. I reached the top of the escalators and looked out across the food court. The McDonald's was lit up. Not just the overhead lights, but the menu boards, the heat lamps, the whole setup. Steam was rising from the warming trays where the burgers and fries should have been, except the trays were empty. Just steam coming up from nothing. The cash registers were chiming away, ka-ching, ka-ching, but there was nobody operating them, nobody standing in line. Same thing at the Taco Bell. All the lights on, steam coming from the heating units, the sound of the drink machines dispensing soda into cups that weren't there. Even the music was playing. That generic instrumental stuff they always had piped in. But it was all empty. Every chair, every table, every counter. Empty as a tomb. I stood there at the top of the escalators, watching steam rise from equipment that shouldn't have power, listening to conversations that shouldn't be happening, smelling French fry oil that shouldn't exist. The supernatural activity wasn't something I could rationalize anymore. Wasn't plumbing problems or electrical shorts or old buildings settling. This was real. This was happening. And those rules weren't protecting the building from intruders. They were protecting me from whatever forces had decided to make Riverside Mall their home. The contrast hit me like a punch to the gut. What I could hear, busy food court, people ordering meals, normal everyday life, and what I could see, empty storefronts with their gates down, dusty tables, dead equipment. 2 different realities existing in the same space. I backed away from the food court, slowly at first, then faster. By the time I reached the escalators, I was practically running down those metal steps, my boots clanging against each step loud enough to wake the dead, which, considering what I'd just witnessed, maybe wasn't the best choice of words. I understood something fundamental in that moment, standing at the bottom of the escalators with my heart hammering against my ribs. Curiosity wasn't just dangerous in this place. It could be deadly. And I'd just learned that lesson the hard way. The worst thing I saw that night happened around 2:30 in the morning, right outside K Jewelers. I'd been making my rounds, keeping to the main corridors like Levi taught me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. some of them anyway. Half the bulbs had burned out years ago, leaving patches of shadow between the pools of sickly yellow light. My footsteps echoed against the tile floors, that hollow sound you get in empty spaces, the kind of sound that makes you realize just how alone you really are. Except I wasn't alone. Not really. I rounded the corner past what used to be Bath and Body Works and stopped dead in my tracks. There they were, standing right in front of Kay Jewelers like it was 1990-something, and the mall was still alive. A family of 4, Mom, Dad, 2 teenagers. The father wore acid-washed jeans that looked brand new despite being 30 years out of style, paired with one of those oversized sweaters with geometric patterns that screamed early 90s. His hair was feathered back, held in place with what had to be a full can of hairspray. The mother, Christ, the mother was wearing a shoulder-padded blazer over stone-washed jeans, her hair teased up so high it defied physics. She had on those chunky gold earrings that caught the light every time she moved her head. The teenagers looked like they'd stepped out of a Sears catalog from my childhood. The girl wore an oversized flannel shirt tied at the waist over high-waisted jeans, her hair crimped into waves that would have taken hours to achieve. The boy had on a windbreaker and those weird pleated pants that were somehow cool back then, his hair parted perfectly down the middle. But it wasn't their clothes that made my blood run cold. It was what they were doing. The father pointed enthusiastically at the Kay Jewelers display cases, his mouth moving like he was talking about engagement rings and anniversary gifts. His gestures were animated, excited, like he was seeing something spectacular behind that dusty glass, something worth getting worked up about. The mother leaned in closer to examine whatever caught her eye, one manicured finger tapping against the security gate that had been locked down for 5 years. The display cases were empty. Had been empty since the day the store closed. I could see right through them from where I stood frozen in the corridor. Could see the dust coating every surface, the dead flies scattered across the bottom shelves. There was nothing there. Nothing at all. But they were shopping. Really shopping. With the kind of focused attention you see during Christmas rush or Valentine's Day panic. The mother nodded approvingly at something only she could see, then pointed to another case, discussing, what? Necklaces? Watches? Wedding bands that existed only in whatever version of reality they were experiencing? The teenagers trailed behind them, looking bored in that universal way. Teenagers look bored when their parents drag them shopping. The girl shifted her weight from foot to foot, clutching shopping bags in both hands. Bags from stores I recognized. JCPenney, Radio Shack, Music Land, KB Toys. Stores that had been dead for years, some of them decades. The bags looked full, heavy with purchases that couldn't possibly exist. The boy had his own collection of bags, including one from Babbage's that made my stomach lurch. Babbage's had closed in '99, got bought out by GameStop before I even graduated high school. But there was their logo, bright and crisp, like the bag had just been handed to him by a smiling cashier. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't some elaborate prank or a case of homeless people taking shelter. This was something else entirely. Something that made Charles Haynes' story seem almost normal by comparison. Rule 6. Never acknowledge shoppers in 1990s clothing who appear in storefronts. Don't make eye contact. Don't interact. Pretend they're not there. My hands started shaking again, just like they had when Levi told me about Charles. The manila folder in my back pocket felt heavier, like it was weighing me down. Those 6 typed pages weren't suggestions or guidelines written by paranoid night guards. They were survival instructions, written by people who'd learned the hard way what happens when you don't follow them. I forced myself to back away slowly, one careful step at a time. My boots wanted to squeak against the tile, but I shifted my weight gradually, testing each footfall before committing to it. The family kept shopping, completely absorbed in their eternal consumer experience. They didn't notice me retreating. Didn't even glance in my direction. Thank God for that. The security office felt like a sanctuary when I finally reached it. I dropped into the rolling chair and immediately pulled up the surveillance monitors, my fingers fumbling with the controls until I found the right camera angle. There they were on screen, clear as day. The father was now pointing at a different display case, his enthusiasm undimmed. The mother had moved to the other side of the store entrance, examining jewelry that existed only in their shared delusion. But watching them on the monitors made it worse somehow. On screen, I could see their movements were too smooth, too purposeful. They moved through their shopping routine with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from doing something countless times. This wasn't their first visit to Kay Jewelers. This was a pattern they'd been repeating for how long? Years. Decades. The girl shifted her shopping bags from one hand to the other, then pointed at something in the window display. Her mother nodded and they both moved closer, their heads tilted at identical angles as they examined whatever phantom merchandise had caught their attention. The synchronization was unsettling, too perfect, too rehearsed. They moved as a unit through stores that existed only in their collective memory. I watched them drift from Kay Jewelers to what used to be Spencer's, then over to the space where Gadzooks had been before it went under. At each stop, they went through the same routine, pointing, examining, discussing purchases with the kind of animated conversation that suggested real engagement with real merchandise. But the stores were empty, gutted. Some still had their security gates down. Others stood open like broken mouths, revealing nothing but bare walls and scattered debris. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't living people. They couldn't be. Living people don't shop in empty stores for 30 years running. Living people don't carry bags from businesses that closed before some of their kids were born. These were remnants, echoes, supernatural leftovers from the mall's heyday, trapped in an endless cycle of consumption that death itself couldn't break. They were shoppers who'd loved this place so much, who'd made it such a central part of their lives that they'd never really left. Even when their bodies failed, even when the stores closed and the lights went dark, some part of them kept coming back, kept shopping, kept living the same Saturday afternoon over and over again. The father pointed enthusiastically at another empty display case, and I understood with absolute certainty that engaging with them would trap me in the same eternal routine. I'd become part of their endless shopping expedition, forever pointing at merchandise that didn't exist, forever discussing purchases that could never be made, forever lost in a consumer paradise that existed only in the memories of the dead. The first sign something had gone seriously wrong came during my third week, when I found the security gates unlocked from the inside. Not just one gate, 3 of them. Spencer's, Hot Topic, and the old Sears anchor store at the far end of the West Wing. I checked those gates at midnight during my first round. Locked tight just like they'd been for the past 5 years. But when I came back around at 2:30, the metal grates hung open like somebody had pushed them up from inside the stores. My hands went cold holding the flashlight. I stood there in the main corridor, staring at Spencer's first. The gate mechanism showed no signs of tampering from the outside. No scratches on the lock housing, no bent metal where somebody might have pried at it. The lock itself sat open in its housing, turned clean from the inside like somebody had the key. But that was impossible. Only 2 keys existed for those gates. Mine, hanging right here on my belt, and Levi's back at the main office. Nobody else had access. Nobody else should have been in the building at all. I walked closer to Spencer's, my boots echoing off the tile floor. The smell hit me first. Not the usual stale air and dust, but something else. Something that reminded me of the break room at my old carpentry shop. Coffee that had been sitting too long. The faint scent of someone's lunch. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the dust. Fresh ones. Clear impressions in the layer of grime that had built up over 5 years of abandonment. Size 10 work boots, I'd guess, with deep treads that left perfect patterns in the accumulated filth. The prints led straight from the gate into Spencer's, disappearing into the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. I followed the trail with my light, keeping my distance. The footprints weren't random wandering. They moved with purpose, straight back toward where the employee break room would have been, like somebody knew exactly where they were going. My radio crackled. Nothing but static. I tried calling Levi but got no response. Not unusual for this time of night, but it made the silence feel heavier. The prints at Hot Topic told the same story. Gate unlocked from inside, fresh footprints leading straight back into the store. These ones looked smaller, maybe a size 8, but just as deliberate, just as impossible. By the time I reached the Sears Anchor store, my hands were shaking again. I forced them still, gripping the flashlight tighter. The big gate stretched across the entire storefront, and it hung open like a mouth. More footprints here, multiple sets this time. Different sizes, different tread patterns. All of them fresh. I should have called the police. Should have followed protocol and reported a break-in. But something in my gut told me this wasn't about burglars or vandals. This was something else entirely. The employee break room sat in the service corridor behind what used to be the orange Julius. I'd walked past it dozens of times during my rounds, never thinking to check inside. Why would I? The mall had been closed for 5 years. The break room should have been empty. The door stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my shoulder, keeping the flashlight raised. The hinges squeaked. A long, drawn-out sound that made my teeth clench. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, though I could have sworn they'd been dark every other time I'd passed by. The room looked exactly like a functioning employee break room. Round tables with plastic chairs, a bulletin board covered in work schedules and safety notices, a microwave on the counter next to a coffee maker with a half-full pot that still looked warm. And in the corner, a white refrigerator humming quietly to itself. I walked over and opened it. The light came on, showing shelves lined with brown paper lunch bags. Each one had a name written in black marker across the front. Maria Santos, Robert Chen, Joshua Martinez, Charles Haynes. My blood went cold. Those were the names I'd seen spelled out in the fountain water. The dead employees from when the mall closed. And Charles was the guard who'd broken Rule 3, who'd been found sitting behind the Radio Shack counter, talking to customers who weren't there. But that wasn't all. There were other names too. Names I didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. Previous guards, I realized. Night security who'd worked here before me and just disappeared. Quit without notice, according to their files. Moved away suddenly. Never to be heard from again. I picked up one of the bags, Maria Santos. It was still cold from the refrigerator. Inside, I found a turkey sandwich wrapped in plastic, an apple, and a note written in neat handwriting. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. The date on the note was from last week. That's when I knew I needed to check the security footage. The office monitors showed the last 72 hours of recorded surveillance. I scrolled back through the feeds, watching empty corridors and dark storefronts. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Then I saw him. Charles Haynes walking his patrol route at 2:15 a.m., clear as day on camera 3, making his rounds just like I did. But Charles had quit months ago. Charles had moved to Oregon. I kept scrolling. There he was again the night before, and the night before that. Same route, same time, night after night. Sometimes alone, sometimes walking with other figures I didn't recognize, but who moved with the same measured pace of security guards making their rounds. I switched to camera 7, the one that covered Spencer's. There was Charles again, 3 nights ago, walking straight up to the locked security gate. He produced a key from his belt, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The camera angle couldn't see into the store itself, but it showed him never coming back out. Yet, There he was on the next night's footage, starting his patrol all over again. I checked Hot Topic's camera. Same thing. A woman in a security uniform I'd never seen before, unlocking the gate and disappearing inside, then showing up the next night to start her rounds fresh, like nothing had happened. The pattern repeated across every camera angle, guards entering stores and never emerging. But the next night, there they were again, walking the same routes, checking the same doors, following the same protocols. An endless loop of security shifts that never ended. My mouth went dry as I realized what I was looking at. The mall wasn't just haunted. It was collecting people, trapping them in some kind of supernatural retail purgatory where the workday never ended, where your shift went on forever and you could never clock out, never go home, never rest. The evidence was overwhelming. Guards before me had become permanent residents doomed to work their shifts for eternity. The footprints in the dust, the fresh lunch bags in the refrigerator, the security footage showing the same impossible patrol routes night after night. It all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. The people who'd supposedly vanished, who'd quit without notice or moved away suddenly, they were still here, still working, still trying to complete shifts that would never end, unable to leave their posts or find their way back to the world of the living. 3:33 in the morning. I'll never forget that time because it's when everything went to hell at once. I was doing my rounds, staying in the main corridors like Levi told me, keeping my distance from the storefronts where that family had been shopping for phantom merchandise all week. The silence felt different that night. Heavier, like the air before a thunderstorm when your skin prickles and dogs start whining. Then I heard it. This low mechanical grinding, metal against metal, coming from everywhere at once. Every single security gate in the mall started rising, not one at a time, not randomly, all of them. Spencer's, Hot Topic, K Jewelers, the old Radio Shack where Charles heard his dead father calling, Bath and Body Works, GameStop, every damn gate in the place, lifting slowly and deliberately like curtains going up for some twisted performance. The sound echoed through the corridors, this symphony of grinding gears and rolling metal that made my teeth ache. I stopped walking. Had to. My legs wouldn't work right. Behind those gates. Christ. The stores weren't empty anymore. Spencer's blazed with fluorescent lighting, every fixture humming like it was 1995 again. The mannequins weren't just standing there either. They were moving, browsing, walking between displays with that jerky, unnatural gait mannequins would have if they could walk. Their plastic heads turned to examine merchandise that wasn't there, their articulated fingers touching air where clothes should hang. At Hot Topic, I watched 3 mannequins stand in what looked like a checkout line. One held its arms in a carrying position, cradling invisible band t-shirts and skull jewelry. The cash register kept beeping, ka-ching, 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 processing sales to customers that didn't exist while the drawer slammed open and shut on its own. But it was the sounds that got to me most, not just the registers, conversations, dozens of them, overlapping and echoing from every open storefront. Fragments of shopping talk. Do you have this in medium? And, that's perfect for Jenny, and how much is this on sale? But no one speaking. Just empty stores conducting business with phantom customers while mannequins played their parts. My radio crackled with static. I grabbed for it, tried to call Levi, but got nothing except white noise that sounded almost like whispers. That's when I saw them coming. The family in 1990s clothes. They'd been window shopping at K Jewelers when this whole nightmare started. But now they were walking straight toward me, not browsing anymore, not pretending to shop, walking toward me with purpose. The father led the way, still wearing that geometric sweater and acid-washed jeans, but his face was different, more focused, like he'd finally found what he'd been looking for all these weeks of endless shopping. His wife followed beside him, those chunky gold earrings catching the fluorescent light from the stores, her shoulder-padded blazer moving stiffly like cardboard. The teenagers trailed behind, still carrying their impossible shopping bags, but their eyes weren't bored anymore. They were hungry. "Sir?" The father's voice carried across the concourse. First time I'd heard any of them speak. "Sir, could you help us?" I knew better than to answer. Rule 6. Don't acknowledge them. Don't make eye contact. But they weren't in storefronts anymore. They were in the main corridor, walking directly toward me with those two smooth movements I'd watched on the security cameras. The father extended his hand as they got closer. His mouth kept moving, shaping words I couldn't quite hear. But I caught fragments. Join us. Permanent. Shopping. Never leave. His wife nodded enthusiastically, pointing back toward the open stores like she was showing me something wonderful. The teenagers held up their shopping bags, displaying their phantom purchases with proud smiles. They wanted me to join them, become part of their eternal shopping trip, another customer who never went home. That's when the fountain exploded. The central fountain, the one that had been spelling out dead people's names with impossible water for weeks, erupted like a geyser. But this wasn't the clear water I'd seen before. This was black, thick and oily, shooting 20 feet into the air before crashing down and spreading across the marble floors of the main concourse. The water carried voices. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. "Help me. I can't find the exit. My shift won't end. I've been shopping for so long. Where's my car? I just want to go home." The voices of everyone who'd gotten trapped here. Mall employees who died and couldn't clock out. Customers who'd shopped until they forgot how to leave. Security guards like Charles who'd broken the rules and lost themselves in this place. The black water kept spreading, flowing down the corridors toward the anchor stores, carrying those pleading voices with it. I could hear Maria Santos begging someone to let her go home to her family. Robert Chen asking why his jewelry kiosk wouldn't close. Joshua from GameStop crying about being 19 and wanting to see his girlfriend again. All of them trapped in this retail purgatory, all of them part of the mall's collection now. The water reached my boots. Cold as winter, thick as motor oil, and when it touched my skin I felt pull. Like it wanted to drag me down into whatever hell these people were living. The voices got louder, more desperate, calling my name now. "Sammy! Sammy, help us! Sammy, don't leave us here! Sammy, stay with us!" The family was closer now, maybe 10 feet away. The father still reaching out, still mouthing words about permanent shopping experiences and never needing to leave. His hand looked solid enough to grab me. I ran. Splashed through that black water toward the security office, my boots slipping on the oily surface while those voices followed me. The water tried to grab my ankles, slow me down, make me part of the collection too. But I kept running, fumbling for my keys while the father called behind me in that friendly voice that made my skin crawl. "Don't run, sir. We just want to show you the stores. Everything's on sale. Everything's perfect." I slammed the security office door and threw the deadbolt. Started dragging furniture, the desk, filing cabinet, spare chair, anything I could move to barricade the door. My hands shook so bad I could barely grip anything, but I kept stacking, kept building that barrier between me and whatever was happening out there. The surveillance monitors showed me everything I couldn't bear to see. Dozens of people wandering the corridors. Former security guards in wrinkled uniforms, their name tags too faded to read, walking patrol routes that would never end. Missing visitors browsing empty shelves with shopping carts that squeaked and rattled. Families like the one in 1990s clothes examining phantom merchandise in stores that looked exactly like they had decades ago. Charles Haynes stood behind the Radio Shack counter, helping customers I couldn't see, pointing at electronics that weren't there. Maria Santos arranged invisible inventory at Spencer's, her movements precise and practiced, like she'd been doing it for years. Security guards I didn't recognize checked doors that were already locked, following protocols for a building that refused to stay closed. They all moved in loops, endless loops. Shopping, working, browsing, securing, serving customers who weren't there in stores that shouldn't exist. Consumer activity that death couldn't stop. The black water from the fountain covered everything now, flowing through every corridor, carrying those desperate voices to every corner of the building. On the monitors, I watched it seep under security gates, flood store interiors, rise up the dead escalators toward the food court where phantom restaurants still served phantom meals. But the people, the trapped people, they didn't seem to notice the water. They just kept shopping, kept working, kept serving. Like they were underwater but didn't need to breathe anymore. I stayed in that office all night, watching the monitors, listening to the voices in the water call my name, hearing the father from the 1990s family knock politely on my door every hour or so, asking if I wanted to see their new purchases. "We found the most wonderful things, sir. The sales are incredible. You really should join us." But I followed the rules, stayed barricaded, didn't answer, didn't open the door, just watched those surveillance feeds and counted the hours until sunrise. When dawn finally broke through the skylight above the main concourse, everything stopped at once. The security gates rolled down with that same mechanical grinding, sealing the stores away. The fountain's black water drained somewhere impossible, leaving the marble floors dry as bone. The voices faded to whispers, then to nothing. On the monitors, the corridors looked empty again. Dead, abandoned, like a mall that had been closed for 5 years and stayed that way. But I knew better now. I'd seen what lived here during the dark hours, what the rules were really protecting me from. The mall hadn't died when it closed. It had just learned to hide. The truth hit me around 4 in the morning, sitting in that barricaded security office with the surveillance monitors showing empty corridors again. All those hours watching the trapped people on camera, Charles walking his eternal patrol, Maria stocking phantom inventory, that family browsing stores that hadn't sold anything in years. I'd been thinking about it all wrong. Riverside Mall hadn't closed. Not really. It had just shifted business hours. I stared at the monitors, watching the normal emptiness return with the sunrise. The black water had drained away without a trace. Security gates hung down over dark storefronts. Everything looked abandoned again, the way it was supposed to look. But that was just the day shift appearance. The mall's real operating hours were midnight to dawn, serving customers who couldn't leave. Couldn't or wouldn't. I wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. My hand shook as I reached for the manila folder in my back pocket. 6 rules. I'd thought they were about protecting the building from... what? Vandals? Ghosts? But that wasn't it at all. The rules weren't designed to keep things out. They were designed to keep guards from staying. Charles Haynes hadn't been found standing outside the main entrance for 3 hours because something had trapped him there. He'd been standing there because he couldn't bring himself to leave. The mall had offered him something, his father's voice, work that mattered, customers who needed help. And Charles had almost taken it. Would have taken it if Levi hadn't found him first. The rules protected us from becoming employees, permanent employees. I thought about Maria Santos in that break room, packing lunches she'd never eat for shifts that would never end. Robert Chen probably polishing jewelry cases filled with nothing but dust. Joshua restocking video games that nobody would ever buy. All of them working forever in a retail paradise that existed only for the dead. And Charles. Christ, Charles was still here. Still making his rounds, still checking locks, still following protocols for a job that would never let him clock out. I'd seen him on the cameras, every night, walking the same route, doing the same work, probably thinking he was protecting something instead of realizing he was just stuck. The mall collected people. It fed on their need to be useful, to serve, to help. Give someone a purpose and they'll work themselves to death. Give them the same purpose after death and they'll work forever. That's what this place was. A supernatural retail operation running on the trapped souls of people who'd loved their jobs too much to quit, even after dying, even after the stores closed, even after there was nothing left to sell. I pulled out my phone, still had signal, which surprised me, and started typing my resignation email to Levi. 2 sentences, clean and simple, effective immediately. Personal reasons. My finger hovered over the send button for maybe 10 minutes, because I knew what would happen next. Levi would find another guard. Some desperate guy like me, probably. Someone who needed the money bad enough to ignore the warning signs. Someone who'd take the night shift at an abandoned mall and tell himself the weird stories were just stories. And that guard would get the same manila folder, the same 6 rules, the same warnings about Charles Haynes and the food court sounds, and the fountain that spelled out names. Maybe he'd follow the rules like I had. Maybe he'd last a few weeks, a few months. Maybe he'd be smart enough to quit. Or maybe he'd be curious. Maybe he'd think he could handle whatever was in the Radio Shack. Maybe he'd decide the voices calling his name needed help. Maybe he'd try to rescue the trapped shoppers instead of ignoring them. And then there'd be another name for the fountain to spell. Another lunch bag in that break room refrigerator. Another security guard walking eternal patrols on the surveillance cameras. I sent the email. The response came back in less than 5 minutes. Levi thanking me for my service. Understanding my decision. No hard feelings. Professional and polite. Like he'd written the same email dozens of times before. Because he probably had. I started moving the furniture away from the door. Desk, filing cabinet, spare chair. Everything back where it belonged. Had to leave the office the way I'd found it. The next guard would need the same setup, the same view of the monitors, the same false sense of security that came with locks and barricades. The manila folder went back in the desk drawer where Levi had pulled it from. Rules 1 through 6, typed on aging paper. Unofficial protocols developed by previous guards. Charles Haynes' story on page 3. All of it waiting for the next person who'd need to know how to survive. Outside the office windows, the mall stretched away in both directions. Empty corridors and dark storefronts, dead escalators and a silent fountain. During the day, it looked like what it was supposed to be, an abandoned building waiting for demolition or renovation. But I knew better now. Come midnight, those security gates would start lifting again. The fountain would start spelling names. The food court would fill with the sounds of a lunch rush that would never end. Shoppers would browse phantom merchandise in stores that existed only in memory. And somewhere in those corridors, Charles Haynes would start his patrol route. Maria Santos would arrange invisible inventory. That family in 1990s clothes would examine empty display cases, forever planning purchases they'd never complete. The mall would be open for business, just like it had been every night since I'd started working here, just like it would be every night after I left. They didn't need me to run their operation. They had plenty of staff already. The cycle would repeat with whoever replaced me. Some new guard would get the keys and the rules and the warning about Charles Haynes. He'd follow the protocols or he wouldn't. He'd survive his first week or he'd join the eternal workforce. The mall would wait patiently either way, because it had all the time in the world and customers who would never stop shopping. I gathered my things, flashlight, radio, the spare batteries Levi had given me. Left the keys on the desk next to the manila folder. My shift was over.